When he thought you would chase after him, you did the opposite. He expected the usual pattern, the predictable response, messages seeking answers, calls trying to fix things, desperate attempts to hold on to what was slipping away. But instead, you surprised him. You stepped back. You embraced silence. And in that moment, a shift occurred, not just in the dynamic between you both, but in his perception of you. Men by nature are conditioned to believe that when they pull away, women will instinctively reach out, driven by the need for closure, reassurance, or just the comfort of what once was. This expectation is not just about ego, but about patterns they've seen repeated over and over. They assume their presence holds a certain weight, that their absence will provoke urgency, and that the moment they withdraw, you will react accordingly. But when you didn't, you disrupted the pattern. You removed the power from his hands and placed it firmly back in yours. At first, he may have felt relieved. Maybe he thought that by pulling away, he was gaining control, asserting dominance over the situation. But as time passed and the reaction he anticipated never came, a new feeling started creeping in. Uncertainty. He started questioning. Did he misjudge your emotions? Did he underestimate your strength? Was he wrong to assume you'd come running? And most importantly, did he just let go of something he should have held on to? By choosing not to chase, you sent an unspoken message that was louder than any words could ever be. It told him that your world does not revolve around him, that your value is not determined by his attention, that you are not desperate, nor are you willing to beg for someone who doesn't recognize your worth. And this realization is powerful. It forces him to reconsider his choices, to wonder if he made a mistake, and to feel the discomfort of losing something he never expected to lose. This isn't about playing games or manipulating emotions. It's about recognizing your worth and standing by it. Because when a man believes that a woman will always be there, no matter how he behaves, he stops valuing her presence. But when she removes herself, he is forced to confront the reality of what her absence truly means. And that realization, it lingers. It sits in the back of his mind, growing stronger with each passing day. In those quiet moments when he expected a message from you and none arrived, when he looked at his phone anticipating a missed call that never came, when he scrolled through social media hoping to find a sign of regret, he was met with nothing but silence. And that silence, it's deafening, it's unsettling. It's the very thing that makes him question everything. He starts remembering the small things, the way you made him feel, the moments of laughter, the comfort of your presence. He realizes that the absence of chaos does not bring peace, but rather an unsettling void. And suddenly, what he once took for granted becomes the very thing he wishes he could have back. By choosing yourself over chasing him, you shift the dynamic. You take away the satisfaction he assumed he'd have in seeing you struggle to hold on to him. You become the one thing men crave but rarely admit. Mystery. And mystery breeds desire. It fuels longing. It makes someone reevaluate what they lost. The truth is, people only start to appreciate something when they feel its absence. And when a man thought he could walk away with ease, only to find himself trapped in the echoes of what used to be, that's when the regret begins. That's when he starts to wish he had made a different choice. That's when he realizes that maybe, just maybe, he was the one who should have been chasing you all along. When you chose not to chase him, you did something far more powerful. You became unpredictable. And in the world of human psychology, unpredictability creates fascination. Men by nature are wired to pursue, to conquer, to seek what feels just out of reach. It's not just about ego. It's about the way the male mind works. The moment something becomes too easy, too predictable, it loses its value. But when something suddenly shifts, when a person they expected to always be there simply isn't anymore, a spark is ignited. At first, he might have convinced himself that his decision was the right one. Maybe he told himself that pulling away was for the best, that things weren't working, that he needed space, or that he simply wasn't as invested as he thought. And because he expected a reaction, pain, pleading, an attempt to restore what was lost, he felt in control. But when you didn't react the way he assumed you would, that control slipped through his fingers. He wasn't prepared for the silence. He wasn't ready for your absence to feel so real. What happens next is subtle, but it's powerful. He starts to wonder. He starts to question. He starts to feel something that wasn't part of the plan. Doubt? Did he misjudge your emotions? Did you ever really need him in the first place? Why aren't you reaching out? Why aren't you showing any signs of missing him? And most importantly, is it possible that you're already moving on? This is where the true power of not chasing comes into play. When someone assumes they have the upper hand, they become comfortable. But when the script flips, when they realize that they were never the center of your world, they're left with a void. And that void is unsettling. It makes them restless. It makes them look back instead of forward. You see, when a man walks away believing you'll always be waiting in the background, he feels safe in his decision. But when he looks back and realizes you're not there, that safety turns into discomfort. And discomfort breeds curiosity. He starts watching. He starts paying attention. He starts finding reasons to check in on you, even if it's just silently through social media or mutual friends. The irony is, the moment you show that you're unbothered, that's when he begins to feel the weight of his own choices. The absence of your presence speaks louder than any words could. It forces him to face the possibility that he miscalculated your value. And that thought alone is enough to plant the seed of regret. It's not about manipulating emotions or playing games. It's about self-respect. It's about standing in your own power and recognizing that you are not defined by whether or not someone chooses you. The moment you stop chasing is the moment you reclaim that power. And when a man senses that shift, when he sees that you are not just surviving but thriving without him, that's when he begins to miss you in ways he never expected. Because in the end, it's never the one who begs to stay that is remembered. It's the one who walked away with their dignity intact. When you chose to focus on yourself instead of chasing him, you unknowingly tapped into one of the most powerful psychological triggers: scarcity. People only truly value what they feel they might lose. The moment he realized you weren't going to fight for him, that you weren't scrambling to convince him of your worth, something inside him shifted. You see, when a person assumes that someone will always be there, they take their presence for granted. It's not always intentional, but it happens. The more accessible you are, the less effort they feel they need to put in. But the moment that accessibility is gone, the moment they feel a void where your presence used to be, that's when they start to reassess everything. At first, he may have felt relief. Maybe he expected the usual cycle: distance, tension, and then eventually you chasing after him, trying to fix things, trying to prove to him why he should stay. That would have fed his ego. That would have reassured him that no matter what, you would still be there, waiting, wanting, hoping. But that's not what happened. Instead, you took a different route. You didn't beg, you didn't plead, you didn't lower yourself in an attempt to make him see your worth. You simply disappeared from his world, leaving him to sit with his own thoughts, his own choices, and his own actions. That's when the regret started creeping in. Slowly at first, maybe just in fleeting thoughts, but it grew stronger as time passed. Why? Because he expected to feel a sense of power in his decision, but instead, he was left with uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable. It makes people question themselves. Did he make a mistake? Did he underestimate you? Did he lose something truly valuable? These thoughts begin to eat away at his initial confidence. And as time passes, he begins to notice something else. You're not just gone, you're thriving. You didn't sit around wallowing in sadness. You didn't make desperate attempts to stay connected. You focused on yourself. You redirected your energy into things that make you better, happier, stronger. And that's what truly unsettles him. He realizes that you are not dependent on his validation. You do not need him to define your happiness. And that realization is what triggers regret the most. Men are naturally drawn to confidence, independence, and self-worth. The moment they see someone carrying themselves with certainty and strength, they can't help but take notice. It's in their nature. So when he sees that you've stepped into your power, that you're glowing in a way he didn't expect, it forces him to rethink everything. He starts wondering if he misjudged you, if he underestimated your value, if he let go of something rare. And this is where the biggest shift happens. He no longer sees you as the person he left behind. He sees you as someone he might not be able to get back. And that realization stings, because in his mind, you were supposed to break down, to crumble, to chase after him and remind him of your worth. Instead, you did the opposite. You showed him that your value does not decrease just because he failed to see it. And nothing is more powerful than that. The biggest irony, the moment he starts regretting his decision is the moment he realizes that you might not even want him back anymore. And that's when he feels the weight of his choices in a way he never expected. Now that he realizes you're no longer chasing him, the dynamic has completely shifted. What was once his assumed control over the situation is now slipping away, and he's left grappling with emotions he never anticipated. He thought he had the upper hand. He believed he could walk away and you would always be there, waiting, longing, proving your worth to him. But you did something entirely different. You didn't fall apart. You didn't beg. You didn't make him the center of your world. Instead, you disappeared. You detached. And that silence, that absence, it's louder than any words could ever be. At first, he may have ignored it, convinced that you would eventually come back around. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. He started to miss you. He didn't just miss the comfort of your presence, he missed the way you made him feel. The admiration, the attention, the warmth. You had been pouring so much energy into him that he never stopped to realize what life would feel like without it. Now he's experiencing that void firsthand. And that void is uncomfortable. It lingers in the quiet moments when he's alone with his thoughts. It shows up when he sees something that reminds him of you, when he hears your favorite song, or when he scrolls through his phone and fights the urge to reach out. Regret is creeping in, but he won't immediately act on it. Why? Because now there's a new emotion taking over, doubt. He doesn't know where he stands with you anymore. He thought he could take you for granted and still have access to you, but now he's not so sure. This uncertainty is powerful. It forces him to evaluate everything. He starts wondering if he made a mistake, if you were more valuable than he gave you credit for, if losing you means losing something he might not be able to replace. And that's where the real shift happens. He begins to feel the weight of his decision. It's no longer about what he wanted in the moment. It's about what he might have permanently lost. But the most frustrating part for him, he no longer has control over the situation. Before, he knew he could get a reaction out of you. He knew that a simple message or an indirect post would get your attention. But now, none of that is working because you've changed. You've leveled up. And you're no longer seeking validation from someone who didn't see your worth. And that is the hardest pill for him to swallow. This is where the internal battle begins for him. His pride tells him to stay silent, to act like he's unbothered, but his emotions, they're screaming at him to do something. And eventually, that internal pressure will break. Whether it's a late night message, an indirect attempt to reconnect, or a sudden burst of curiosity about your life, he will reach a point where he can no longer ignore the regret building inside him. But here's the most important thing to understand. By the time he realizes your true value, you will have already realized your own. And that changes everything. Because when a person sees their worth, they no longer settle for someone who once overlooked it. The tables have turned. He's the one wondering, hoping, and regretting, while you are the one who has moved forward, stronger, wiser, and with a newfound sense of confidence that he never saw coming. When he finally reaches the point of regret, when the weight of his choices starts pressing down on him, he will be faced with a realization he never anticipated: you don't need him anymore. That is the moment everything shifts permanently. He thought he had time. He thought you would always be there, waiting for him to figure things out, waiting for him to acknowledge what he lost. But time kept moving, and so did you. At first, he may try to convince himself that he can win you back. Maybe he believes a simple message will reignite the connection, or that showing up unexpectedly will remind you of the bond you once shared. But what he doesn't realize is that the version of you he left behind no longer exists. You've evolved. You've grown. The pain of losing him transformed into a strength he never expected. And that's where the regret deepens. Because he now sees that the person he took for granted has outgrown him. He starts analyzing every detail, wondering where he went wrong. He remembers the way you used to look at him with admiration, the way you made him feel important, the way your presence filled the space around him with warmth. But now, that warmth is gone and he's left in the cold, realizing that he was the one who pushed it away. This is where desperation creeps in. Maybe he tries to make his presence known subtly at first, liking your posts, watching your stories, finding excuses to be where you are. But when he sees that you remain unaffected, that you're genuinely happy and thriving without him, it stings in a way he never imagined. Because now he's forced to admit something he never wanted to face. You were never the one who needed him. He was the one who needed you. And that realization, it's unbearable. He once felt in control, confident that no matter what, he could always return, that you would always welcome him back. But the tables have turned, and now he is the one left wondering, hoping, regretting. The very thought of you moving on, of you finding someone who truly values you, eats away at him. Because now he sees that he was never irreplaceable. But here's the most powerful part of all. By the time he reaches this breaking point, you have already healed. You no longer look at him as the man you once longed for. You see him for what he truly is, a lesson, a chapter in your story, not the entire book. You've built a life that no longer revolves around him, and that is what he will struggle to accept the most. He will think back to the times he ignored your worth, the moments he dismissed your love, the times he assumed you would always be there. And for the first time, he will feel the absence of what he lost in a way that he cannot escape. But by then, it won't matter anymore, because you've already moved forward, leaving him behind in the very place he once thought he could leave you. And then the final realization sets in, the harshest, most undeniable truth of all. He has no control over you anymore. The very thought of you, once a source of reassurance, now haunts him. He assumed he had the upper hand, that you would always be waiting, that your feelings for him would never fade. But now he's confronted with something that shakes him to his core. You have moved on, not just in words, but in action, in energy, in the way you carry yourself. At first, he tries to brush it off, telling himself that this is just a phase, that you're only pretending to be happy. He believes that deep down, you still think about him, that you still hope for a message from him, that some part of you still belongs to him. But when time passes and you remain unbothered, when he sees you living a life that has nothing to do with him, his confidence begins to crumble. He replays memories in his mind, trying to pinpoint the moment he lost you for good. Was it when he ignored your value, when he dismissed your feelings, when he assumed he could always come back? The more he thinks, the more he realizes there was never one single moment. It was a slow burn, a gradual detachment, a series of choices he made that pushed you away. And now he is left with nothing but regret. The hardest part for him to accept is that you're not bitter, you're not angry, you don't waste time trying to make him jealous or proving a point. That would have given him power. But instead, you're indifferent. You exist in a space where his presence or absence makes no difference to you. And that's what crushes him the most. Because indifference is stronger than hate, stronger than resentment. It means he no longer holds any emotional weight in your life. So he does what so many do when faced with this kind of regret. He tries to pull you back in. He reaches out, whether directly or indirectly. He may send a message, a simple "how have you been?" as if nothing ever happened. He may try to remind you of the good times, hoping nostalgia will weaken your resolve. Or maybe he won't say anything at all, but his actions will scream for your attention. He'll suddenly show up in places he knows you frequent, start posting things meant for you to see, trying to plant seeds of doubt in your mind. But by this point, you see it all for what it is. A desperate attempt to regain control. And the most beautiful part, you don't fall for it, because you have reclaimed your power. You have built a life that fulfills you, one where his presence is no longer required. You no longer need closure, validation, or explanations. You have found everything you were searching for within yourself. The final stage of his regret is acceptance. Accepting that he let something irreplaceable slip through his fingers, that he made choices that cannot be undone, that the door he thought was always open has now been shut forever, but by then it's too late. Because you're not just gone, you're thriving.